G'day, ladies and gents, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to the Wednesday webcast with Mike. We started this process by giving people useful information around decision-making in crisis and under pressure when COVID first hit, as businesses and individuals and families were really reeling and trying to decide how they'd navigate with uncertain times and incomplete information. As particularly Australia is moving more out of lockdown phase now, we've shifted the focus of our conversations to be more about recovery and longer term leadership. We're acutely aware that some of our audience members in other parts of the world are still deeply in the thick of COVID response and in quite deep medical crisis. And some of the earlier conversations may well be useful to you. We're certainly not out of the woods in Australia here either yet. We've done very well so far, but the experience in Victoria over the last couple of weeks has certainly shown that we're by no means immune. We've just managed our isolation well. So we'll see how that unfolds over the next little while. It's my great pleasure today to have Professor Gary Martin with us. Gary's the CEO of the Australian Institute of Management in Western Australia. He's a regular columnist for a number of media outlets. He's authored all sorts of articles and bits and pieces on subjects like leadership, on workplace management and structure. He's a regular commentator on those kinds of issues and gets into all sorts of interesting and often humorous territory there. Gary, it's a real pleasure to have you here. I'm looking forward to our discussion. How are you?
I'm well, Mike, and you?
Very well, thank you very much. So, Gary, maybe as a starting point, you've written a few articles in recent weeks just talking about how workplaces will shift permanently as a result of COVID. So obviously businesses scrambled to get out of office and work from home functionality up and running, and many of them did it rough and ready and quickly. It's proved to be perhaps a surprisingly successful experiment in terms of some of the attitudes. I reckon one of the most interesting issues there is how trust has changed, because a lot of the commentary about working from home pre-COVID was, well, if we let people work from home, they're basically going to be watching Netflix with their feet up on the couch rather than doing anything productive. Do you think trust has been changed by this experience? And if so, how?
Just to avoid the trust question to start off with, that's a good way to start, is avoiding the question, but to go to the broader issue of working from home, and there was once a stigma associated with it. I think what we've done is we've not necessarily built trust in a big way, but we've done something that is reduced the stigma of working from home. So people, you know, when you used to say, well, you know, I'm going to work on home, particularly if it was a Friday or a Monday, people would say, oh, you're having a long weekend, it's a nice week, it's nice weather, and so, you know, you'll be putting your feet up, as you say, or be down the beach or doing all these other sorts of things. So we've actually have challenged that stigma. Working from home is legitimate to many. And of course, towards the end of this, just before everyone was working from home, people were saying, yes, we can work from home now. And what we're finding also now, if you talk to people around this state, for example, you'll find that people are saying, yeah, look, working from home is good, but there's some advantages of working in the office. So we're sort of in that a hybrid model now. People say, yeah, it's okay to work at home a couple of days a week, but we want you in the office as well. Some organisations are just completely going to you've got to come back to the office, and finding it very hard to get people back. However, to answer the question then, sorry about that long-winded answer, but to answer the question, trust has improved in some workplaces because people have demonstrated they can work at home. But there's been some awful type of experiences that people have had through working from home and being micromanaged by people as well, who are suddenly finding that they've got to manage people from afar, and they don't know how to do that. So what they've done is they've gone into micromanagement mode, and that's killed some trust rather than built trust in some cases.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Micromanagement's rarely a good tactic from a leadership point of view, is it? Um, this is possibly a little rabbit hole, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on. I observe often in leadership groups that I work with that micromanagement is sometimes a product of we're not actually sure what the work of leadership is. So can't help but jump on the tools because then at least we feel like we're doing something valuable. Do you reckon that's a reasonable assessment, or is there more to that issue than just a lack of awareness around leadership and what it entails?
Well, I think why we've gone back to micromanaging, and not all leaders have done this, is because it is the default position. If they're unsure of a situation, then our automatic response is to try and control things through, annoying the heck out of people on a day-to-day basis and every minute. But I think micromanagement in some situations is perfectly good approach to management. That might seem odd, but some people might need micromanagement until they get on their feet. So there's good micromanagement and there's also poor micromanagement in the scheme of things. It's just that micromanaging people is just another tool amongst the myriad of management techniques and tools that you have available to yourself. And some people actually initially do very well out of being given that guidance. And I think for some people at home who are working from home, they've suddenly had all this time where they haven't had to manage their time, or they haven't had to think about the time when they're in the office. So they've appreciated micromanagement to a certain extent. However, those people that are very autonomous and are able to work from home, without any trouble, have found it a hindrance when their boss has said, leave your camera on. Leave your camera on while you're working because I don't know what you're doing and I want to be able to chat to you. Or if you haven't answered an email quickly, been on the phone saying, where are you? What are you doing? So it's such a mixed bag that I'm not sure where this is going to go. And I can already see some people who are saying, this is wonderful working from home, now coming back and saying, actually, it's kind of nice to have you in the office. So we're in this situation now where some of the shine of working from home is disappearing a little bit when people are trying to drag people back to the office.
Yeah.
And those that have had a taste of working from home kind of love it if it works for them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a number of issues in there where, speaking to various leadership teams at an exec level, some organisations are starting to run into a bit of an issue where they've actually used up a bank that they've built from face-to-face work. So, if we're working around the corridors, there's inevitably informal conversations over the water cooler and between meetings and things like that. And sometimes serious work gets done in those moments. Or the wheel gets lubricated so that the serious discussions and work can happen elsewhere. And there's also a sense of connection and collective understanding that gets built because we're in the same rooms having discussions and we're exposed to the full experience of work. There's a bit of a sense that maybe that bank has been drawn down and some organisations are running out of runway, to put it that way, where they'll potentially run into a bit of a productivity wall, where previously the initial end of that runway is this seems more productive because we're not doing all of those side conversations, we're a bit more focused. What's your take on that, and what are you observing in terms of those broader patterns?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair at the moment to make any judgment about working from home because what we've been doing at the moment is actually not working from home. We've been trying to work from home right in the middle of a pandemic, and that's a statement I've heard, used around the place, and I believe that's the case. People have been, it's not a typical work from home type of situation. It's been a working or trying to work at home with children around or your partner around or people, trying to check up on you. It's not your typical working from home type situation. The question about, you know, that interaction you get from a workplace and being present, sure, you do get that. But having said that, I actually felt somewhat closer to my team during when a lot of people were working from home, because I was more regularly engaging with them, and it forced me to engage with them perhaps than I do more regularly, because we're always on calls and so on. Now that might be a bit, what's the word? Zoom fatigue is what people were talking about. But I actually think if you manage remotely properly, you can actually get the best of the equivalent of that water cooler type chat if you structure things appropriately. So just as an example, when we've had any Zoom conferences here, people tend to log on earlier and you have a chat with them. And you perhaps have more of a chat with them than you would normally because you're waiting for other people and so on. So there's ways of managing these things. And I think now what we actually have to work out is what is working from home really like and how do we do this best? Because what we were finding before, particularly in places like Western Australia, is working from home was more of a survival type thing because we had to do it. Yes. Now we know we want to pick the best bits of that and go back and make it a real working from home model. And I'm not sure we're there yet because there's a number of unresolved issues. One of them is, and this is an interesting one that's just been, just started to emerge, is, okay, so offices say they're going to downsize, they need less space. So there's a great saving for those offices. But if I'm using part of my house as a permanent, if you like, branch of an office, is a company going to pay me rent for that part of my house? And the reason I say that is because I think it's in Switzerland, the court case recently where a company was forced to pay employees rent for using their homes as part of that office scape. So it's an interesting and new take on what happens with office space. So it might stop people from, necessarily giving up office space like they were, because, just like any other expense, it's if you take clients out for lunch and it's a company expense, company reimburses you. If you use your workspace permanently as an office, is it a little mini branch of the office, and your company's going to pay you to use that space? Because it's certainly something that you can't use your office. You can't use your home office for something else. So there's all these sort of unresolved issues, and I find that pretty fascinating.
Just as you're talking there, the issue of insurance came to mind as well. If someone injures themselves at work from home, how does workers' comp cover that? If it's an issue with how the household is set up that caused the injury, how does that impact insurance? There's a lot of interesting bits of nuance in there when you start to unpack it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think some organisations have underestimated their duty of care when it comes to working from home, at least within the Australian context. Most employers would be advised to have inspections of sites off-site, in other words, home environments, before they actually flick the switch and say, yes, this can be a permanent arrangement. And I think most disturbingly, in Australia, recently there was a domestic violence case where an employer was held liable for domestic violence that occurred during work time when both employees of the same company were working from home. I think that's as far as the story goes. And there was violence involved, and who's liable for that? So I think, it's, again, we were working from home during a pandemic, and that's not the same as working from home on a regular and more permanent basis. And I think there's
Yeah.
a whole range of things that needs to be unpacked along those lines.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Some of the conversations I've been having over the last couple of weeks particularly have been focused on how do we unpack what we've learnt and actually make intentional decisions that are well informed about this stuff. Because the reality's been we've been forced into an experiment fairly abruptly and certainly not with the degree of planning and foresight that we would like for a permanent situation. And I reckon one of the risks is that we just snap back to normal, or perhaps even worse than normal, just because of its familiarity and comfort, and that we don't do the work of exploring these bits of nuance and territory where we could make significant evolutions of how we work and how workplaces are structured and run and managed. But we're doing that sort of shooting from the hip rather than with real intentionality and in a well thought through way.
I think, Mike, one of the interesting things is that now we have got a little bit of time, or in Australia we've got a little bit more time now to work through some of the issues to make working from home attractive on an ongoing basis. But the reality is, I reckon that, you know, for a full-time employer, working from home is actually full-time employee, I should say, working from home is going to be maybe a couple of days a week and being in the office other times. And I think it will be a hybrid model rather than a complete, work from home arrangement, unless there's compelling reasons like, you know, your head office is based in a city and you want to attract the very best talent, and some of that talent's in a remote area or a regional area, then I think that's a different matter altogether.
Yeah, and there's been plenty of companies that have very successfully run remote teams of all kinds pre-COVID and will continue to do, no doubt. A lot of global companies are good examples there. You know, we've got a number of mining companies based here in Perth, for example, that have got teams in other countries of all sorts and sizes that are disconnected from typical workplace arrangements in all kinds of ways, partly because of the physical and political environments that they're in. And certainly tech companies do this stuff in very innovative ways and very flexible ways. So it's probably a case of taking the best of the lessons learned and putting it together with some thought is really the key thinking here, isn't it? Don't just assume this or that. Actually work it through and unfold the expectations in detail and work out what some of the extreme edges of that territory could be, I guess, if it goes well or goes poorly.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues for people is if we've got some of our workforce in the office all the time or in the workplace all the time, and meaning the physical workplace or the headquarters or branch or whatever, and some working from home, it's really it's a big challenge now for our leaders and managers to try and make sure that it remains an inclusive workplace. Yes. And involves people that are working from home, because the stories that I get are that, you know, if you're one of or two of 100 or even 10 of 100 in a workforce working from home, you can easily be left out of the loop in a lot of things. So there's that issue. There's also an increased cyberbullying issue as well, where people can very subtly bully people that are working from home, which is another emerging issue that needs to be addressed as well, as part of that new, to use the jargon, reset type workplace model.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's just move sideways a bit into the flu. So I know you and I had a bit of discussion over one of your recent articles, which was fairly strongly putting the point which we've been fairly strongly putting, let's be honest, for a number of years now, which is if you're sick, don't turn up to work and give it to everyone else. And your perspective in that article was essentially that anyone turning up with a sniffle post-COVID is likely to be evicted fairly quickly. And we had a bit of a discussion online about navigating that workplace environment where sometimes it's actually the culture that drives that turning up when we're sick. You know, the mantra of busyness, or, you know, people getting frowned upon for seeming unproductive, and so choosing to push through rather than take a bit of time off and get well and not give it to others. From a leadership point of view, particularly, how do you navigate that line well, do you think?
I think, again, this is where working from home's actually worked, because that there's a little bit of trust that's been built, and people are learning how to work from home effectively. I know in my own staff, if anybody has been slightly unwell, they've stayed home because I've told them that that's what I want them to do. If they've been well enough to continue on working, they have. If they have, not been, then I've told them you need to take the day off, because that's what a day off is about, is recouping. But I think we have seen, I think it was about 2 years ago, I wrote this piece around the flu season, around what I'd called sick shaming, and what others refer to as sick shaming. And, it was a time when you went into the office, it was that, people would say, that's fantastic that you've come in and you're unwell, okay? Now, over the last few years, we've had some bad flu seasons, and so people have been saying, the workforce has been divided. Half have been saying, that's really good that you've come in to work sick and you haven't let the team down. And the other half has said, go home, we don't want your bugs, no sympathy, you're doing the wrong thing, and being quite vocal and direct, if you like, in getting people who are sick. So then I revisited that piece at the time that COVID started to impact, and said, here's the thing now. It was that you would be a martyr. Now, definitely not. If you go into a workplace sick, then don't expect you're going to get any sympathy. In fact, expect to be sent home. And I know a lot of workplaces that are enforcing that. And I think that's been a pretty good thing, because, the incidence of not just COVID, but other catchy things is down, and sickness is not, we don't seem to be having anywhere near that amount, mainly because of lockdown, but because people will not come into the workplace sick, or some do, but most don't. And because we use things like this everywhere, and we've been social distancing and all of those sorts of things. But, if it only takes one or two people to go into the workplace, for other people to suddenly turn around and say, well, now I'm at risk. And I think we've become far more conscious of not to go in coughing, spluttering. It's just frowned upon if you do any of that sort of thing. It's complicated a little bit by the fact that we've got some people saying that, and other people saying, our workforce numbers are lower, so now we've got to do more with less, which is, an absolutely ridiculous statement to make. It's a statement that I've made before, and I'll be the first to admit it. But I've thought about that, and it's just one of the silliest things that people can say, we've got to do more with less, when we know reality is that we're going to do less with less and more with more. So if you think about something as simple as exercise, if you do more exercise, you're probably going to become fitter. But if you do less exercise, in my case, I'll put on kilos. So less is less and more is more. What people have to do is embrace that other statement, which is work smarter rather than harder. And there's some substance around that, where there's no substance around doing more with less. But when people throw that out, we've got to do more with less, what that does is it pressures people to come back into a workplace when they're sick. Simple as that.
Yeah, great observation. And, we're at one level talking about workplace cultures here, and they're transmitted often in very, very subtle ways. So, there's what actually gets said in the official narrative of the organisation, and then there's the boss rolling his eyes when somebody does or doesn't do something that possibly says more than the volumes of stuff in print and in the formal communications. Interesting challenges. So Australian Institute of Management WA, you're a significant training organisation, is particularly in the leadership and management space, and obviously training is one of those sectors that's copped a fair walloping in COVID. Like many people that do face-to-face work, I would imagine your halls have been fairly echoey over the last little while. How have you had to evolve your business during COVID to stay ahead of it?
Yeah, it's an interesting time for us because our car park, if you were here in February and March, was absolutely full, and people were parking on the lawn and all over the place. So it was a really nice problem to have that we didn't have enough parking. And all of a sudden, the last few days of March, I think it was, the car park emptied out. And it wasn't because we didn't have things on offer, because we still did, and we were allowed to operate. There was nothing that shut us down. It's just had to follow the state government, federal government guidelines about space and social distancing and all those sorts of things. But we never actually had to close the face-to-face business. But nobody wanted to be in a face-to-face environment, so that was a challenge. Now, we've been told over and over and over again that people love the experience of coming in, and half of the experience itself is interacting with others, networking with others, learning from others, as well as the people that present our courses. But it's what happens in the break times and lunch times and after our sessions and before our sessions that's obviously important as well. It's those other sorts of learning domains. So our business was 90% face-to-face, and either here on site where I am today, or in workplaces around the country, and in fact around the world. And so we had to make some rapid changes to what we did, and that involved putting a number of face-to-face type offerings online as digital offerings. It worked very well. The feedback was good. Some products in particular took off more than others. In other words, there was high demand for some things, not for others. We did virtual coaching, we did virtual classes, we did a whole series of short, sharp e-learning courses that could be done anytime, any place. There were those. We had high cost and low cost offerings. And so within a matter of 3 weeks, probably 2 weeks, we'd started to offer a whole range of new digital type products. And to a large extent, they were taken up, as I said, some more than others. Interestingly though, now that we've got face-to-face training, we have 90% people coming back for face-to-face training and around 10% still doing virtual type classes, and in particular some areas. So people have really valued the face-to-face. Now, my issue now is to try and work out whether this is just the face-to-face stuff is because people are coming back to it because they've missed doing it, and eventually it'll level out and we'll have a blend, maybe 70% of face-to-face training and maybe 30% virtual. But what the great thing about this is, if there's any great thing, because there's a lot of sadness amongst what's happened as well, is that we know now that people are more familiar with digital type of offerings and virtual offerings, and so we will include those, and that will help us expand our footprint internationally through having a number of products available virtually, which it's not that we weren't prepared to do them before, it's just that people seemed to prefer that face-to-face stuff, and now a lot of people are used to doing things virtually. So you've got a choice of doing what you do, of what you want to do, and I think that's one of the great things out of all of this. If there's any good thing, is that you know, people are more inclined to connect around the world and with others. You just look at, you know, today we've got Doug here and June from different parts of the world, and that's all because we're on a virtual type of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you reckon there's longer term implications, your business model to date? You've got a beautiful campus there, and you mentioned your fairly large car park that's been busting at the seams at various points. So you're quite intensive in terms of your connection to property and specific places and classrooms, etc. Do you reckon there's much of an implication for that, or will that remain as relevant as it's ever been?
No, I think it's as relevant as it's ever been. We've got some really good facilities here, and people like coming to the facilities. And I think what the virtual stuff will do will, in particular, help us to address regional Australia training needs, and also some overseas training needs as well. I think a small proportion of our current market will continue to do virtual training with us, but I think our footprint can be expanded through people's comfort with virtual initiatives and offerings. It's almost like everybody's been connected via social media platform, as well as these video recording platforms that we find ourselves on now over the past couple of months. So the comfort zone is there, and it just means we'll be able to hopefully grow our business in the longer term by combining or using that hybrid model of maybe, as I said, 70% face-to-face and 30% online. And I guess it's the sort of stuff that we do, as I said in the opening remarks. People love face-to-face because they interact with people from such diverse backgrounds. And that's, you know, if you're doing a compliance type of training program where there's right and wrong answers, so easy to do some of those things online because there's a right and wrong answer. In the space that we operate, there's multiple perspectives on multiple issues. Yeah. And, you know, quite often that's best dealt with in an adult learning classroom environment where people can exchange those ideas and feel comfortable to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. From the point of view of broader leadership, as a CEO, what are the kind of key issues that you're addressing with your staff in this kind of emergence process? And are there ways that you're intentionally managing things like cohesion and energy and direction and disruption across the business?
Yeah, look, I think we've done a number of different things. We've got a new flat, if you like, senior leadership team structure that helps to get things done without jumping through layers. I think that's been, I've been very pleased with what we've been able to do post-COVID with a different management structure. So that's certainly been exciting. I think we're really focused here on people's workload because we did lose staff in, you know, a while back when business wasn't going well. And so people are trying to juggle a number of different jobs. Some of them were their own jobs and some of them were other duties. So we're watching out for that. We're keeping in contact with people regularly. That's even less important now than it was when people were working from home. We were really trying to manage that a lot better now because we're seeing people on a day-to-day basis and we're talking to them maybe on the hour. It's a lot easier to see if someone's struggling, but that's still in our thoughts. People's mental health. The other thing that we're really focused on is that concept of not doing more with less. So it's not doing more with less. I'm really trying to get my head around how we do that. And you know what? The best thing is, out of all of this new way of working here is we're all about priorities. We're dropping things from the past that we've done because we've always done them that way, or because we've always done them. So we're dropping some of those things. We're doing some reinvention, reinventing some of the things we do where they need reinventing. We're not having, we're trying to eliminate what I call fake work. So when you send an email out that's sent out to 20 people and only 2 need to be involved, we're trying to cut that sort of stuff out. We're trying to cut out hundreds of unnecessary meetings. We've never had a lot of meetings, but we've had some that have gone on too long, or some that are not necessary, or some that have included a whole range of people that didn't need to be included. So trying to cut out those sorts of things, trying not to reinvent stuff for reinvention's sake. That's fake work. But I think if you want to use the jargon again, resetting workplaces should be about trying to get people to focus on what the priorities are to help a business take the next step, rather than trying to cram it in with all those other things you used to do that might be fake work and might not be key priorities.
Yeah, if there's
enormous amounts of fake work in workplaces now.
Yes, yeah. I think, if there's one thread through the various things we've been talking about, it's being really intentional and focusing your energy where it should be, rather than just kind of going along for the ride. Which I guess is part of the challenge of leadership, full stop, isn't it? A mentor of mine once said that, he reminded me that the root of the word decide was the same as suicide and homicide. You were literally killing off options in favour of whatever your focus needed to be, and that's certainly a big part of the role. Given that you're a bit of a commentator on trends in this space, in the leadership space, if we sort of look forward in the next 3 to 6 months, what do you think are the big things that leaders will need to have their eye on over that sort of relatively near-term horizon?
Yeah, look, I think the most obvious one is there's a survival type of imperative for a lot of businesses, and I think that's obviously really important. And how can you put your best foot forward is really, I guess, the theme of what I've been saying anyway. It's how can we as an organisation, or how can an organisation put their best foot forward, not only to meet their existing, customers or clients' needs, but also to attract new customers as well. So I think a lot of people would be going into that. How do you put your best foot forward type market to be a sustainable business? But I think even beyond that, or perhaps related to that, is how you can diversify what you do, so that you don't have all of your balls up in the air at the same time. You need to be able to, to juggle multiple portfolios. Some of those things that you do are going to work well at particular times, and if they don't work well, then there'll be other areas that do. And you need to look at the university sector in Australia to get a message there, and that is, we were very reliant in Australian universities on international students. They're not here at the moment, and so what can you do? So what's happening is that universities and higher education sectors feeling a lot of pain with the market dropping out of international students. So the lessons and what leaders are going to be focused on is how can we diversify our revenue streams so that we're not put in those positions again. And that's why I say you can't not spend time now thinking how can we best put our best foot forward and de-risk, if it's jargon, but de-risk by having multiple things that work, or at least not relying on one line of thought or one line of product and services. It's how can you do a number of things with what you've got, because at the same time as doing all of this, people have got often got less staff and less people power because they've lost revenue and can't afford to keep people on. The other thing that's big in Australia is what happened obviously at the end of September, when some of the government support of business drops out, that's actually going to make a difference. And I think people are turning their minds, business leaders are turning their minds to that particular time. And again, it's what can we do now to put our best foot forward and be a little bit innovative, a little bit different to continue to attract customers, with spending perhaps going to be on the decline after the government withdraws some of its assistance.
Yeah, great thoughts. They're certainly pressing issues in the near-term horizon. Gary, thanks very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I know that you've got plenty to do there behind your desk, so greatly value your time. If people are looking for either you for commentary on various things or for Australian Institute of Management WA, what's the best way to track you down?
Well, you can go to our website, but I mean, if you're aiming to get me, our website's aimwa.com. But if you want to get me, the best way to get me is through social media and to message me via LinkedIn. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, post things there regularly, but also interact with their people regularly via that platform. So not hard to actually locate me on the LinkedIn platform in particular.
Great. Thanks again, Gary. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mike.